Welcome to the Holly Furtick Book Club. It is the afternoon edition of the Holly Furtick Book Club. It is the summer edition of the Holly Furtick Book Club. I have missed you guys. We have not met since February, and I have felt it. And I have been looking forward to talking to you about this book and to talking to this author about this book for months. And I mean months. Like, I read this book probably back before our last book club, so probably back in January. Still, here we are in July in my top 2 books that I've read this year. And maybe, one of my favorite books I've ever read. And I'm so excited. You guys are here, and I'm so excited to be talking to you about Broken Country with Clare Leslie Hall. She's going to join us. Did you read this book? Did you love this book? Tell me, let me know in the comments. Hello.
Hi, Holly. Hi. Can you see me properly? Yes. Hi. How are you? Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I mean, thank you for this story. Such a powerful, wonderful story. And we're all so excited to talk to you about it.
Oh, I'm excited to talk to you too. I love everything you've said so far. I think spot on.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that I just like to start off with is by having our author read a passage from the book, and just one of your favorite passages. Do you mind?
Oh, sure. I'm going to read the prologue. And I'll say the prologue came actually about 2 years into the writing, and I think it kind of changed everything. So I'll read that for you.
Okay.
The farmer is dead. He is dead. And all anyone wants to know is, who killed him? Was it an accident, or was it murder? It looks like murder, they say, with that gunshot wound to the heart. So precise. It must have been intended. They are waiting for me to speak. 2 pairs of eyes, relentless in their stares. But how can I tell them what he wants me to say? The words we have practiced over and over in the minutes before the police arrive. I shake my head. I need more time. It's true what they say. You can live a whole lifetime in a final moment. We are that boy and girl again, with all of it ahead, a glory stretch of light and wondrous beauty, of nights beneath the stars. He is waiting for me to look at him, and when I do, he smiles to show me he is fine. The briefest nod of his head. Say it, Beth. Say it now. I look at his face again, beautiful to me, then and now and always. One final glance between us before everything changes.
I mean, you had me hooked straight away, and there aren't a lot of books that do that. Sometimes it takes a while for you to get into it, and I remember being like, what is this and what is going on? And I'm here for it. I want to know everything. So you said that the prologue happened 2 years into the writing of this book. And
yes.
One of the things that I am so curious to know from you is, like, how did you pull this off? Like,
yeah, sorry, can you see me properly? Yes. Well,
yes.
Look, it was, the idea came literally in a heartbeat. It was so strange. It's never happened to me like that before or since, but we live in this kind of old farmhouse, and my husband was running with our son's puppy in the fields, and it was lambing season. And the farmer threatened to shoot him, which was horrifying, and it didn't happen. But what did happen was this incredibly vivid scene came into my head, which, as we know, is kind of in the opening of the book. And it was this farmer and his wife in their fields of sheep, and a little boy running towards them, looking for his lost dog. And I had the thought instantly that the boy reminded them of the child they'd lost. And also that there was a physical attraction between the boy's father and the farmer's wife. So it was like it got this kind of love triangle. But the actual writing of it was so tricky. I think because I didn't know very much about farming, and I did so much research, and maybe that kind of put me on a few wrong tracks. And I wrote it for 2 years, and it was a contemporary story. Frank and Gabriel had voices, and it was sort of close, but it wasn't quite landing. So I had a break, which broke my heart, because I started writing another book. And after about 6 months, I realized how to do it. And I thought, it's a period novel. It's a woman's story. And I was on holiday with my family and I woke up really early, and that first line came into my head. The farmer said, "He is dead." And I knew it was going to have a murder trial. As well as being a love story, it was going to have a murder trial, which I'd never written courtroom drama. I didn't even know if I could. And I just sat down and wrote that scene, and it never changed. It's exactly as it was, is how it is now. And I just suddenly, it was like I saw the whole story in a line. I was like, this is what it is, and this is how it works. And it's so funny because I think as writers, it's very hard to take breaks. You think, if I just sit here, it'll all work out. But actually, the best thing I ever did was giving it up, because in my subconscious, I suddenly understood what it was, and it's a woman's story, of course.
So when you gave up the book, was it like, this book is dead, I can't do this, and I need to let this book I need to give up? Or was it like, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to figure this out?
It was super tough, actually, because I had an agent and I loved her. She was a brilliant agent, and she'd worked with me on a couple of drafts, and she called me in and said, "Claire, this book isn't landing. You need to, throw it away and start something else." And I didn't want to lose her as my agent because I really respected her. But I was heartbroken. And then after 6 months, I just realised that I had to go back to the book. And I was actually with a girlfriend. We were driving back from the cinema, and she said, "I just don't know why you've done this. You loved those characters." And it just triggered something in my head. And I thought, I did love those characters. And I've been thinking about them ever since. They were just so locked in my heart, Frank and Gabriel and Beth. Particularly Frank. I'm going to say I really went back for Frank. And there were a few scenes with Frank that crossed every single version. And I mean, I'm thinking 20 drafts. But there were about 3 scenes with Frank, and that was what I couldn't get out of my head, and I wanted to know what his ending was. And so after 6 months, I went back to it, and I changed agent, and it was really heartbreaking, but it was.
I think that's such an incredible story of just tenacity and just the knowing that like this story had to come through you, and no matter what, and just the heartbreak of an agent being like, I don't think you can do this. But then finally, like, coming back to it, I just think that's awesome. So where did you, so you said, let me go back and put together some of the things that you just said. It started off in like a contemporary setting.
Yeah.
And it also was being told by Beth, Frank, and Gabriel.
That's right. Yeah. The three men. And Frank had quite it was very experimental. There were a lot more poems in it. But the last poem was in every single draft. And Frank, I quite like it in a way. I wrote him in a very sort of rustic, earthy, experimental style. And I think that I really knew who the men were by the time I went back to the book, because I'd written their voices. So I kind of knew who they were, and I knew what her dilemma was. But it was only once, the question of the book really is it possible to love 2 people at once? And I knew I needed to create these men that were polar opposites from each other, but they connect to completely different parts of who she is. So, Gabriel's very bookish and romantic and creative and passionate, so is she, and they have this intellectual connection. Whereas Frank is very down to earth and funny and kind, and he introduces her to the land, and it becomes who she is, really. And so I wanted the reader to sort of feel the dilemma that Beth is in, and so I sort of suddenly understood that I would do 2 timelines. Also that it was a period novel, because I wanted to show the gender and class difference between Beth and Gabriel. He's this entitled, privileged boy who his life just goes to plan no matter what happens, whereas Beth gets knocked off course really quickly because, she has these unusual aspirations for a girl of her time. And I wanted to show that. And I wanted the reader, I hope, to feel in 1955 you were in this first love affair, and it's very visceral, like first love can sometimes be, it's unforgettable, and then the next chapter, you're with this rather saint-like great husband. So I hope that the reader feels the confusion that Beth felt. So I sort of suddenly understood that was how to do it. And then the murder trial, that just felt like such a risk for me as a writer because I'd never written anything like it. But I went and watched at the Old Bailey is this very famous old courthouse, and you can sit in the public gallery, and I watched a murder and a manslaughter trial for a week, and it was incredible. I just got so caught up in it. It was literally like watching a play at times. The barristers are so persuasive and so emotional and theatrical. And then I just came home and wrote my own version of it. And I think it took the book in a completely different direction.
I mean, I can't imagine the book without that element, without that mystery, and without that murder, because to me that was one of the things that made it so unique. Did you ever want, so you had to choose who to tell the story through. How did you know to tell the story through Beth and not through Frank? Because we all love Frank.
Beth came to me when I was, when I had the idea and I thought of the sheepfield scene. She came to me, and her character never changed. I knew exactly who she was. I knew that she was a mother who was, everything that she did was driven by her desperate longing for Bobby. And so she was just incredibly clear to me. And I actually think she's the one with the most emotional maturity in some ways, because she's the only one who tries to face her grief and process it, whereas the men, are completely closed down and learn how to sort of face their guilt in the course of the novel. And so she was always going to be a main protagonist for me. But I think it just everything fell into place once I did it through in Beth's voice. It's so funny, I loved having the men's voices, particularly Gabriel, who was quite sort of funny, and I loved writing them, but it just didn't work until I wrote it as Beth.
So when you add in the court scene in the beginning, at that point, did you know who was the murderer and who was murdered?
Well, I knew that Jimmy was murdered, but earlier on, it had been a tough, as it plays out in court, there was a tussle, and it was kind of almost manslaughter. I think that Leo, I think in an original version, I think that Leo runs in and Frank with the gun, and Frank grabs it off him and it goes off, something like that. But it suddenly became clear to me that it needed to be Leo. And actually, having Leo as the child who murders Jimmy, I was very worried about that, because it felt right for the story, but I was very worried about it because I didn't want to leave him with the legacy of guilt into adulthood.
Right.
He's just a child who gets caught up in an adult drama that he can't understand, and that's why I changed the ending, and I had Gabriel and Leo go visit Frank. And when I look back on that, it was kind of the best thing, because not only did Leo understand why Frank had done what he'd done, Frank is forced to face his grief and to process it and to let go of his guilt. And I think that he can come back in 6 years' time. He comes back and they can build their marriage from the ground up, because he's suddenly, he's let go of Bobby and he's let go of all that pain. So that was kind of something I didn't expect, but it was a really good result, I think.
So when you're writing these characters, are they as you're writing, do they do things that surprise you, or do you know what they're going to do?
I'm not really much of a planner. I wish I was, but I'm not. I do know, where the story's going, and I can't start writing until I have a sense of the characters. And I kind of know a beginning and a middle and an end, but of course it can change. And Broken Country changed hugely. I mean, it really did, from the first draft to last. But things do surprise me. Like I posted this picture on Instagram, I think it was 3 years into writing. And I posted, when this twist falls out of the sky that makes sense of your whole story. And what it was that Bobby was Gabriel's son. And I'd thought of that at the very start of writing, and I just thought, gosh, no way, you can't pull that off. That's way too hard. And then I was just walking the dog, and I was like, I mean, it's the only way. It's got to be, of course, because it makes sense of everything. It makes you understand why Frank does what he does. That they have this guilt, not just about the way that Bobby dies, but about the fact that they hid his parentage from Gabriel. You know, that's a huge thing for them to carry. And so, gosh, that was tricky, because then I had to come back and my timeline didn't work, and there were all sorts of little changes I had to make. So, for example, you could never know exactly when Frank and Beth got married. Things like that I had to shroud, because otherwise the reader would have guessed. And one of the things that was a surprise to me was that I thought Leo and Gabriel, not Leo, Louisa and Gabriel got married, and then had a baby. But then I worked it out with the timeline. I'm like, nope, they're going to have that baby out of wedlock. But actually, I quite like that, because I felt it showed, there's all the press photographers going, wow, here they are. They didn't care. He's this entitled man, and no one cares, including Tessa. Whereas for Beth, her whole life is knocked off course. So, yeah. So those things surprised me and ended up being really good for the story.
Tell me about the title. Where in this 4-year journey did you have the title?
So it was called Savages, strangely, to begin with, and it was a bit more savage. The men were a bit more savage, and then I think it was called This Savage Land. And then one day, I think probably 2.5 years in, Broken Country just came into my head, and I think I thought, it doesn't tell you exactly what you're getting in the story, but I really loved it because it's quite poetic, and I felt that I wanted a title that really encapsulated the sort of pastoral world that is so important for the novel. And I also sort of think it encapsulates the village, which is very divided. You've got the sort of posh landowners on one side, and then you've got the ordinary farming folk on the other. And I also think a marriage is like its own country, and I think it kind of hints at this broken marriage that we start the novel and the marriage is in turmoil. And I think that's where it starts, with Beth having this great big what if locked inside her, and along comes Gabriel. So I actually was worried that it was going to change. I loved it. My agent loved it. But then I was so pleasantly surprised that the publishers went with it as well, because I think sometimes titles, you're told they must explain what the story says, which I don't think it does exactly.
No, but when you put it all together and you think about like their marriage as something that was as broken, almost beyond repair, and how are they going to get this back? And you think about the landscape and all of the people, and I just thought that the title was really beautiful and like you said, very poetic. And it is, like, to me, it fits the book too, because this is a book that, like, you're not quite sure where it's going until the end. And so, and then it's like everything like goes and like the whole thing makes sense. And I feel like the title is sort of included in that, and I just thought like that it was just so vast and open, but yet so perfect for just these broken people and people who feel like their lives are broken into pieces that can't be put together. But there was so much hope at the end that, like, you can survive infidelity, you can survive loss and grief, you can survive, your marriage can survive these things. And the path is broken and the path is ugly, but there is a path where they can come together. I'm curious if you heard what I said about love at first sight, and if you believe in that, and if you were actually trying to like write a book that was sort of like the antithesis of that.
It wasn't my intention. I wasn't thinking about that, but I kind of do agree with you. Although I think what you have at first sight, which is what Beth and Gabriel have, is powerful intellectual connection and physical attraction. And that's what I believe in. But it turns very quickly into love. I think I was trying to write a novel that was about all forms of love. and I was contrasting that incredibly visceral passion that you feel at the beginning, which can be sort of stay inside of you, and it can just be reactivated. It's almost like it can be hardwired into your veins, I think. And, you know, because it ends through miscommunication, they both have this massive what if locked inside them. And I was also wanting to write about a much more hard-won love, which is married love. You know, what I love about Beth, and I know some people don't like her, I love the fact that her life gets knocked off course, you know, by snobbery, really, and prejudice. But she marries Frank, and she makes the best. She's a survivor. She makes the best of what she has. She falls in love with Frank. You know, I don't think she probably does day one, but she loves him deeply. And she also falls in love with the landscape. And that marriage is, you know, it goes through so many knocks. And really what I wanted to show there was how, you know, that hard-won married love, which has so many ups and downs, you know, it can triumph. And, you know, particularly I think couples who've lost a child, it can be so easy to sort of break up because, you know, you're bringing, one person is always bringing the other one down, you know, with their terrible grief and their memories. It's unimaginable pain that they go through. And what I love about those two is that I think they get this chance that you never really get in a marriage because everything goes wrong, because she has the affair, because he's accused of murder. They have that waiting period when they're waiting for the trial. And she says to Frank, here I am, look at me, these are my flaws, you have to listen, this is every bad thing I've ever done. And he says the same. And whoever gets the chance to sort of wipe the slate clean and say, okay, I still love you, I still want you. So I feel that was kind of something I wanted to say, to explore, was a marriage that goes wrong, but that can be rebuilt. And then, of course, you know, there's the mother's love for a son. I was kind of exploring that too.
Was there anything personal in your life that really enabled you to write? I just felt like you encaptured grief so beautifully, and also just like the difficulty of a marriage navigating grief. Did that come from something personal or something that you experienced or someone that you know?
It didn't. I think, you know, when Beth came into my head, as a mother, I've got 3 children, you know, I had probably instinctively shied away from stories about parental bereavement to both reading them and writing them. It just felt like something that would be so painful to explore, but she came into my head and I just knew who she was, and that was that. I had no choice. And I really just imagined her pain. I understood it because I think any mother can imagine that it's something that you can't get over, you know. And so there was that. But then I think that the novel is about different forms of grief. And I think that Frank and Jimmy, I really knew who they were. And I didn't understand this until after I'd written the novel. But they lose their mother first. They lose their mother when Frank is 13 and Leo is 9. Not Leo, sorry, Jimmy is 9. And I think that, you know, I think it's probably the 1950. Their father is just a real 1950s man. He doesn't talk about emotion. He doesn't help them. He just buries his sadness in hard work. And that's what they learn. Nobody shows them how to process grief. And what happens as a result is that Jimmy, you know, from the age of 9, he stops caring about himself. And that's at the root of his character. So I really knew who he was. Yes, he's sometimes violent and he drinks, but that's just self-sabotage. And this is this awful kind of default mechanism that he has. And Frank, a little bit the same. You know, the reason that his marriage falls into turmoil with Beth is partly his fault, because he doesn't give her the space to grieve. She wants to remember Bobby with him, but he doesn't allow that. And I realised my own experience, because I lost my mum when I was 21, and I went back. She died one summer, and I went back to university. I was living 500 miles away from home, and nobody said anything. You know, everyone was 20 and 21, and no one said anything. Maybe my housemates did once. And it was just such a shocking realisation that this seismic thing had happened to me, and I just had to carry on. And so that's what I did. But I kind of locked it down inside me and didn't deal with it till 20 years later. it became something I just couldn't talk about or think about. And I was like Frank, I wasn't allowing myself the wonderful memories that my sisters were allowing themselves.
Wow.
I couldn't go anywhere near it. So I think that there's a lot of me in Frank and Jimmy.
Yeah.
Probably. Young me, probably.
Yeah. I've never asked anyone this before, and maybe it's not like that important, but how do you choose your characters' names?
Oh, it's so important. And it's so difficult. It's very random. And I think my names are always quite old fashioned. I don't think I can ever go with kind of modern names for some reason. They never really work. It's just trial and error, looking at books, looking at people's names. I mean, until I get the names, I can't write the story. It's so strange. And I'm writing a new book at the moment, and I know some of those names are going to change. It's funny.
That's so interesting. I heard you say in another interview that you were a huge reader. How do you think that influenced you to write this story?
Um, it's so hard to answer that because I've never been anything else. I've always been a reader and a writer. I mean, I was writing stories from the age of 6, and I did stop when I became a journalist in my 20s, but and then I started again in my 30s. So writing fiction, it's just always been there. But one thing I will say is that I'm pretty sure there was a book that I loved, which my mum gave me, called I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith. And it's just this wonderful, wonderful book, which was published in the late 40s. And it's about two sisters who live in this crumbling, derelict castle with this eccentric family. And their father's an author who's blocked. And anyway, these two boys, men, move into the country estate next door. And it's whether or not they'll fall in love with them. But it's just the most wonderful, wonderful, beautifully captured story. It's funny, and it's about this eccentric family. And I think I'm always looking for that book, both to write it and to read it, if I'm honest. I think it's right there in my heart, that book.
What made you take the jump from being a journalist to writing fiction?
I'd always wanted to. I mean, really, from the age of 6, there was never anything else I ever wanted. I assumed after university that I didn't even think about publishing, which I now think wouldn't that have been lovely? But it just didn't occur to me. I thought, you must be a journalist. You can't write a novel at 21. So I just went into papers, and that's what I did. And I don't regret it. I had a really fun time. It was so fun working on a newspaper with loads of other people the same age as me. And I think it both stymied and enhanced my style, because I definitely remember feeling stage fright when I started writing fiction in my 30s, because I thought I was so used to writing as a reporter, and at that kind of very kind of pared down style. And I had to sort of teach myself to be a little bit freer and a bit more lyrical. But at the same time, I wasn't afraid of a blank page, and I'm used to deadlines, and all of those things I think probably fed into my writing. And so it was always my ambition. I remember going traveling when I was in my 20s and thinking, right, it's now or never, And by the way, it was another 20 years, but before I got published. But I thought, you've got to do it now. You're so old. You have to do it. So from about 30, I was kind of trying, but I was also writing books and ditching books, and life was happening, and I was sending things off to agents when they weren't ready, and it was a long old journey. And when I look back at it, I just think that was me learning how to craft a novel. I read obsessively all the time, but I never went to creative writing school, so I didn't really. It took me a long time to learn how to craft a story.
So was there any point where you told yourself, like, this is just a hobby, I'm never gonna have a book published? And how did you, were there people along your journey that were a huge part of encouraging you to continue to write?
Well, definitely my husband from day one. He's always been there, and he's always read everything. Not always, he's sometimes quite critical about it, but he's always been there and as a supporter, and he's always said, you've got to do it, and you've got to pick yourself up after every rejection. What I will say is that my first novel, which came out in 2018, that book, I started writing it when we moved to the country, and my baby, who's now 17, was 6 weeks old, and on and off I wrote it over 7 years, so a really, really long time. And John, my partner, used to take the children off and to stay at his mum's, and so that I could write, which was really kind of him because the children were really little at this point. And I remember he'd send me these photos of my daughter sort of dangling upside down on a rope swing, and I just feel so gutted. And I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You should be with them. I felt so torn. And I remember lying awake in the middle of the night and asking myself, it was so painful, and it was all, and I just said, should you stop? And then I thought about it. I really thought about it. I thought, oh, actually, I can't stop. And it is who I am, and it doesn't matter whether I get published or not. And something clicked in me then. I kind of relaxed, and actually I got a book deal quite quickly after that. And I think it was this, whether or not I was published had become like a stick I was beating myself with. And it had taken all the joy out of it. I'd forgotten the joy of writing. So that was a really big moment, even though, it just, and it really changed how I feel, because it is very easy as a writer. It's a privilege to write. It's joy. It's what I love to do. And sometimes things don't go well. You have good days and bad days, like you do with everything. And I'm just trying really hard now to remember the kind of joy of it, and to walk away when it's not going well, because it's not life or death. It's just writing. I can take it way too seriously.
So that's really beautiful. I think it's a really great testament of you saying, like, even if I don't ever have a book published, this is something that I'm meant to do. This is something that brings me joy. But then to like have the ultimate, like, you published a book and it's just gone absolute crazy. What a beautiful reward, I think, for, 20 years and people telling you like, this isn't working, to just stick with it. I think is such an incredible encouragement for anybody watching who's doing whatever it is that, they feel passionate about, because we all have times where we want to quit. And then to like, I even think to like bring that, like, I can feel that in your story too, of like a woman who realizes like, yeah, the most horrific thing has happened to me, but I don't get to just quit, and I have to choose how I'm going to move forward in this. And
I think that's exactly how I feel about her too. I think that she has to find emotional resilience. She's dealt the worst blow of all, and she has to find a way to survive, and she does. And that is what I love about Beth. I know that she makes some really questionable choices, and she betrays Frank, and Frank is like a saint. But I understood why she did what she did. And I worked really hard to sort of maybe show in the timeline, to reveal the things that had gone wrong in her life in a way that you would understand why she was tempted. And actually what I was exploring with her, yes, she is wildly attracted to Gabriel, both physically and intellectually. And yes, he represents the life she always wanted. But really more than that, I think it's nostalgia, and it's nostalgia for who she was. And with Gabriel, she has an opportunity to see herself through his eyes as the girl she was before everything went so wrong. And that's as strong a pull for her as Gabriel himself. But of course, that's so sad, because I think nostalgia does have a sad tinge to it, because we're kind of pining for things that have gone. And Beth has changed. She's a mother, and she's a married woman. She's gone through all this stuff with Frank. She can never be that girl again, and that's kind of what she has to learn.
Yes, what she has to realize is that I can't have what happened, and you can't go backwards, and you can't have that relationship, even though she like tries, but like something in her knows. I don't know. I think that's what I really loved about the book was like, I think every woman to a certain degree struggles with that, whether they act on it or not. They look back on their life when they're, in their midlife, and they go, how would my life have been different if I had made different choices? We all think that. And I think the beauty of this book is the message that you can only move forward with the decisions that you've made, and you can't go backwards. You can't live wondering what your life would have been like, because this is the path. And I just love that in the end she chose the life that she had. And yeah, thank you so much. It was just such a beautiful, complicated story that you really did pull off. It's really awesome.
Thank you so much. It means so much to me to hear that. It really does.
Is there anything that you're working on now that you want to tell us, like any secrets?
I can just tell you a little bit, which is, it wasn't all that heartache that I went through when I stopped writing Broken Country, and I started writing another book. And I Capture the Castle. It's not that, but it's about an eccentric family living in a clifftop hotel on the Jurassic Coast in Dorset. So it's sea this time. And the premise has changed completely and utterly, totally changed. I've got but it's got 2 love stories, and there's a murder. So it's, in some ways, it's kind of similar tonally, but it's very, very different. And I'm really, really loving doing it. And the nice thing is, you know, that setting I've gone back to it. So in a way, I feel like I've gone back to the book I was writing in between.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, we can't wait for more from you. But in the meantime, thank you so much for really pushing through and making this story happen. I think this story is important for people to read. And I don't think there's anything wrong with reading romance novels and escaping into other worlds. But I think sometimes it's really important to like peek into someone's life and see your own self in their story. And so just really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for saying that. I love hearing that. Thank you so much, Holly.
Okay, well, we're cheering you on, and we'll be excited for more from you. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks. It's been lovely talking to you. Bye.
Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I loved this book, Broken Country by Clare Leslie Hall. I so enjoyed talking with her about the depth and the breadth of this story, and it challenged me, and I hope that it challenged you as well. If you like it, leave me a comment. If you've read something that you think we might like for book club, leave me a comment. Share this with someone who you think might enjoy this interview, somebody who also enjoyed this book. And as always, if you'd like to be an official member of the Holly Furtick Book Club, all you have to do is go to hollyfurtick.com, click the link for book club, give me your email address, and I will keep you updated on what we're reading, and then you can maybe join us for our live conversation. And also, if you really like this book, Broken Country, maybe try reading Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. And I also have an interview with him from our book club on that book as well. All right, like, subscribe, share this with someone that you think might like it, and I'll see you back here